This map displays the geopolitical reality of the 6th century BC. The ancient Near East was defined by aggressive imperial expansion. First Assyrian and then Babylonian armies marched westward, systematically pushing their borders outward until they eventually swallowed the southern kingdom of Judah. In 587 BC, this imperial expansion reached its climax. After an 18-month siege, the Babylonian military breached the walls of Jerusalem and systematically destroyed the city. For the Israelites, this military defeat created an immediate theological crisis. All the historic landmarks of their faith collapsed at once. The Davidic monarchy ended, the Promised Land was lost to a foreign power, and the central site of their worship, the Jerusalem Temple, was reduced to ruins. Following the destruction, the surviving elite and leadership of Jerusalem were forcibly deported. They were marched away from the ruins of their homes and relocated directly into the heart of the Babylonian Empire as prisoners of war. To these exiled Israelites, the events of 587 BC looked like the final failure of their God to protect them. The survival of their faith required the development of a radical new theological explanation that could account for the total annihilation of their nation. Readers looking for explanations often turn to the prophets of this era. The book of Jeremiah offers a highly personal perspective, filled with the prophet's own laments and philosophical inner struggles regarding the disaster. The book of Ezekiel offers something completely different. It contains almost nothing about Ezekiel as a person. Instead, the text is rigidly dated, heavily focused on precise architectural measurements, and dominated by bizarre, extreme visions. While these elements might seem chaotic on the surface, they actually form a highly structured theological matrix. Ezekiel builds directly upon an older tradition known as classical prophecy. The core premise of classical prophecy is that geopolitical disasters are not accidents of history, nor are they evidence of God's weakness. Rather, foreign invasions are the providential, outworking judgment of God against a disobedient people. Ezekiel takes this established agenda and applies an uncompromising priestly lens to it. He uses his background in rituals to construct an argument designed to shatter the psychological denial of his exiled audience. The first half of Ezekiel's ministry is directed at a specific group, the elite prisoners of war who were deported in an earlier capture of Jerusalem in 597 BC. Living in Babylon, this group remained in deep denial, praying and firmly believing they would return home very soon. This diagram maps the theological argument Ezekiel presents to them. It begins with two interconnected nodes: Israel's receipt of covenant grace, which immediately links to their covenant obligation. Earlier prophets anchored God's grace in specific historical traditions. They pointed to the Exodus from Egypt, or they relied on Zion theology, the belief that God's presence in the Jerusalem temple guaranteed the city's permanent protection. Ezekiel actively subverts these traditions. He rejects Zion theology as irrelevant for the current crisis. When he does mention the Exodus, he ignores the narrative of salvation entirely and instead frames it as a time when the Israelites were already sinners. By stripping away the comforting traditions of unconditional grace, Ezekiel forces the exiles to confront their relationship with God strictly as a matter of legal responsibility and moral demand. This leads directly to the third node in the classical matrix, Israel's failure to uphold that responsibility, resulting in a breach of contract. While earlier prophets focused heavily on social failings and societal injustice to prove this breach, Ezekiel applies his own diagnostic lens. Because of his training, he evaluates the nation entirely through a priestly lexicon. He teaches the exiles using strict categories of clean and unclean, holy and profane. The crimes he highlights are highly specific to this background. He points to religious irregularities in the temple, the use of local shrines at high places, and image worship. For Ezekiel the priest, idolatry represents a literal, physical contamination of the divine space, a ritual pollution that necessitates a severe reaction from God. The contamination triggers the fourth node, divine rejection and ultimate judgment. Ezekiel provides strict legal justification for this rejection. He imports the ancient priestly documents of Leviticus 26 to argue that because the covenant was broken, the specified curses have been officially activated. He drives this point home with a terrifying vision where the literal presence of God abandons the Jerusalem temple, leaving the city entirely unprotected from the Babylonian army. Then the massive geopolitical pivot of the text occurs. Word arrives in 587 BC that the 18-month siege has ended. Jerusalem has finally fallen and been destroyed. The destruction of the city validated Ezekiel's warnings, but it was not the end of the story. It was the necessary clearing of the slate, allowing him to shift his prophetic message away from doom and toward hope. With the judgment complete, the final node of the matrix becomes accessible: miraculous renewal. Addressing the newly arriving group of 587 BC exiles, Ezekiel completely changes his tone. He offers a message of structural renewal, a rebuilt temple, and a return to the promised land. To ensure this new era survives, he introduces the metaphor of a heart transplant. He promises that God will remake the people from the inside, replacing their old rebellious spirit with a new one. But this comes with a crucial proviso. Salvation requires immediate moral responsibility. Ezekiel receives a new commission to act as a watchman for Israel, warning the exiles and enforcing covenant standards right now, before they ever return home. Ezekiel's salvation is a barbed gift. The exiles cannot sit passively and wait for rescue. They must actively commit to living responsibly in exile to participate in the coming renewal. Throughout this process, Ezekiel relies on highly unorthodox methods, falling into deep trances, reporting physical transportation by the Spirit, and engaging in bizarre symbolic actions. Why not just deliver more traditional sermons? The answer lies in the psychological state of his audience. These prisoners of war were deeply traumatized by their forced migration. They were completely unwilling, and perhaps unable, to listen to a message promising that even worse disaster was coming. To counter this, Ezekiel employs radical theocentricity. Unlike Jeremiah, Ezekiel rarely reacts or asserts his own will. He completely strips away his own personality to place God absolutely at the center of the narrative. He acts as a pure, transparent conduit. He forces a visually overwhelming divine reality directly onto his audience, serving merely to report what God commands him to say and do. Ezekiel utilized sensationalism as a calculated pedagogical weapon designed to bypass the exiles' denial and demand their absolute attention. This diagram illustrates how precisely this theological matrix maps onto the physical structure of the biblical text. Looking at a timeline from 593 BC to 573 BC, the narrative advances in perfect chronological sequence through the first 40 chapters of the book. The exact fulcrum of the text lands on chapter 33. This is the moment the news of Jerusalem's fall arrives in Babylon, perfectly splitting Ezekiel's ministry between the early messages of judgment and the later messages of salvation. Reading Ezekiel requires a journey of spiritual archaeology. The audience must travel downhill alongside the prophet, experiencing the total destruction of their worldview before they are allowed to start climbing uphill again. This rigid framework became Ezekiel's ultimate legacy. He provided the post-exilic prophets, like Haggai and Zechariah, with the exact theological blueprint needed to guide the people once they returned to the land. Ultimately, Ezekiel bridges the gap between ancient temple worship and post-exilic Judaism. He demonstrates that divine providence operates through catastrophic historical events to enforce uncompromising moral accountability.